A Navy SEAL's K9 smelled death on a land deed nobody touched for 40 years, and the truth was buried underground. Rain hammered the courthouse windows the day Caleb Turner paid $185 for Iowa's most cursed 40 acres. Farmers laughed, locals whispered about missing hunters and poisoned water. But Caleb's retired military dog, Ghost, suddenly froze and growled at the property map before they even saw the land. And deep beneath Deadwater Field, something abandoned for decades was waiting for them to uncover it. Comment 1 if you'd stay and fight for the land, or 0 if you would have run, and tell us where you're watching from. The courthouse in Black Hollow, Iowa, smelled like wet wool, burnt coffee, and old paper. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows as farmers, bankers, and land investors filled the folding chairs inside the second-floor meeting room. Muddy boots scraped the wooden floor. Men in seed company jackets leaned against the walls, with styrofoam cups in their hands, while county clerks shuffled paperwork beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Outside, November wind pushed gray clouds low across the flat Iowa fields. Inside, nobody noticed the man sitting alone in the back row. Caleb Turner preferred it that way. At 56 years old, the former Navy SEAL looked older than his age in certain light. Hard years had carved deep lines beside his mouth and across his forehead. His dark beard carried more gray than black now, trimmed short but uneven, like a man who cut it himself using a cracked truck mirror. His jeans were faded at the knees. His brown canvas jacket had been repaired twice along the shoulder seam with heavy thread. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his old Marine Corps cap onto the floor beside his boots. At his feet lay a German Shepherd. The dog was enormous, black and tan fur, scar across the muzzle, one ear slightly torn at the tip. Ghost. Even asleep, the retired military K9 seemed alert somehow, his chest rising slowly, while one paw twitched every few seconds, like he was chasing something in a dream. People glanced at the dog more than they looked at Caleb. A woman near the front whispered to her husband, "That's the homeless vet I told you about. The one living out near Route 16? Sleeps in that old pickup truck." Her husband looked back carefully. Dog's probably worth more than the truck. Caleb heard them. He didn't react. After 20 years in special operations, he had learned silence was sometimes stronger than anger. At the front of the room, County Treasurer Bill Harlan adjusted his glasses and tapped the microphone. "All right, folks, let's continue with delinquent parcel number 14. The auction moved slowly. A bankrupt grain lot sold first. Then an abandoned machine shed outside Marion County. Then 2 acres near the interstate purchased by a trucking company from Des Moines. Caleb sat motionless through all of it. Ghost remained curled beneath the chair. Rain rattled harder against the windows. A heater somewhere inside the courthouse clanged like an old pipe wrench. Then Bill Harlan cleared his throat. "Next property, parcel 22. He paused briefly before reading the description. 40 acres agricultural wetland west of Black Hollow. Unincorporated section near Miller's Creek. A few people immediately looked away. Someone near the middle row chuckled. "Oh, hell," another man muttered. "Deadwater Field." Bill continued reading. Property inaccessible during parts of winter. Prior owner deceased. Taxes delinquent 7 years. Nobody picked up a bidding card. Bill glanced around the room. Opening bid is $185. Silence. Wind groaned outside the courthouse windows. A man wearing a John Deere hat laughed quietly. "You'd have to pay me to walk out there." Another voice answered from somewhere near the wall. "My granddad said cows refused to graze near that place after dark." Your granddad also thought radios caused nosebleeds. Low laughter rolled through the room. But not everyone laughed. An older rancher sitting near the aisle rubbed his jaw uneasily. People disappeared out there. The laughter faded slightly. Bill Harlan sighed. "We're not starting ghost stories again, Earl. I'm telling you what I heard. Hunters get drunk and wander off every deer season," someone else snapped. Still, nobody raised a bid card. The room carried that strange tension small towns sometimes hold around certain places. Not fear exactly. Something older. Avoidance. Bill checked the sheet again. $185 for 40 acres, he said. Any interest at all? Caleb finally moved. He raised one hand. The folding chair creaked beneath him. Several heads turned immediately. Bill blinked. I have 185 from the gentleman in the back. Nobody countered. Not one person. Ghost suddenly lifted his head. The dog's ears stood straight up. A low growl rolled from deep inside his chest. Caleb looked down sharply. Ghost was staring toward the front of the room, not at the people, at the map. Pinned beside Bill Harlan on a corkboard was an enlarged county survey image of Deadwater Field. Flooded timber, swamp grass, abandoned structures swallowed by black water. Ghost rose slowly onto all fours. The growl deepened. Every muscle along the dog's back tightened. Several people shifted nervously. "What's wrong with that dog?" somebody whispered. Caleb placed one hand against Ghost's neck. Easy. But Ghost did not look away from the map. His amber eyes stayed locked on the property image with terrifying focus, like he recognized something. Bill cleared his throat awkwardly. "Do I hear 200? Nothing." The room remained dead silent. "Sold," Bill finally announced. "Parcel 22 to Caleb Turner for $185. The gavel cracked against wood. A few people shook their heads immediately. One man laughed outright. "Congratulations," he called toward Caleb. "You just bought 40 acres of mosquitoes and bad memories." More laughter followed. Caleb ignored all of it. Ghost didn't. The dog kept staring at the map, still growling softly. Caleb tightened his grip on the leash and stood. At 6'2", he towered over most men in the room, despite the stiffness in his posture. Old injuries lingered in the way he moved. Left knee slightly slower. Right shoulder tight beneath the jacket. He collected the property papers from the clerk without speaking much. The young woman behind the table gave him a nervous smile. "You really planning to live out there?" "Maybe. There's no utilities. I've lived without worse." She looked at Ghost. The dog still seemed agitated. "What's his name?" "Ghost." "Military?" Caleb nodded once. "Explosives detection." The woman's expression shifted slightly after hearing that. Because Ghost wasn't reacting like an ordinary dog. He was reacting like a working dog. A trained one. As Caleb signed the paperwork, two local farmers nearby continued whispering. "Whole place ought to be bulldozed. You remember the Jensen boy?" The second man nodded slowly. "Went missing out there in '89. Never found him. Sheriff said he drowned. Sheriff said lots of things." Caleb's hand paused briefly over the signature line. Only for a second. Then he finished signing. Outside, the cold hit hard. Rain mixed with sleet now, sharp against exposed skin. The courthouse steps glistened under dull afternoon light as Caleb walked toward the parking lot. His truck sat alone near the far curb. A rusted dark blue Ford with mismatched doors and a cracked taillight held together mostly by stubbornness. Everything Caleb owned was inside it. A duffel bag, 2 blankets, a camp stove, an old cigar box filled with military medals he never opened anymore. Ghost jumped into the passenger seat immediately after Caleb unlocked the truck. But instead of settling down, the dog remained standing, staring back toward the courthouse. Toward the property map still visible through the upstairs window, growling again. Caleb climbed behind the wheel slowly. "What is it, buddy?" Ghost's ears twitched. The growl stopped, then started again lower than before. Caleb looked toward the courthouse. Rain blurred the glass upstairs, but for a brief second, he thought he saw someone standing beside the map room window watching him. A tall figure, motionless. Then lightning flashed somewhere beyond town, and the figure vanished into reflection. Caleb frowned slightly. Probably nothing. He started the engine. The truck coughed twice before finally turning over. Ghost still hadn't relaxed. Caleb rested one hand against the steering wheel while sleet clicked softly against the windshield. For years after Afghanistan, he had learned to trust certain instincts, especially Ghost's. The dog had saved his life twice overseas. Once from an IED buried beneath a dirt road outside Kandahar. Once from a sniper hidden inside ruined concrete buildings near Helmand Province. Ghost never reacted without reason. Never. Caleb looked again toward the courthouse window. Empty now. The heater inside the truck barely worked. Cold air drifted through cracks near the dashboard, while windshield wipers smeared freezing rain across the glass. He unfolded the property map beside him carefully. Deadwater Field, 40 flooded acres west of Black Hollow. Most of the land looked drowned beneath dark marsh and timber. But one detail caught Caleb's eye immediately. Near the center of the property stood a faded square shape, almost hidden beneath floodwater markings. A structure, maybe an old barn, maybe something else. Ghost suddenly barked once. Sharp, violent. Caleb looked down fast. The dog's nose was pressed directly against that same spot on the map. The faded square near the middle of the property. Then Ghost began whining softly. Not fear, urgency. Outside town, thunder rolled across the empty Iowa fields. Caleb stared at the map in silence while something cold moved slowly through his chest. Not regret, not fear, something older. The feeling a soldier gets moments before stepping into dangerous territory. The feeling that somewhere ahead, something buried is waiting to wake up. Ghost kept staring at the map, and far beyond Black Hollow, beneath 40 flooded acres. Nobody wanted cold wind moved through dead trees standing in black water. Waiting, the drive west took nearly an hour. Rain turned the Iowa backroad slick and silver, beneath Caleb Turner's headlights, while Ghost sat upright in the passenger seat without blinking once. The farther they drove from town, the emptier the world became. Farmhouses disappeared. Mailboxes grew farther apart. Telephone poles leaned crooked beside drainage ditches overflowing with black water. By the time Caleb turned onto the gravel county road leading toward Deadwater Field, daylight was dying. The storm had gotten worse. Cold rain lashed sideways across the windshield, while thunder rolled low over the open farmland. Mud splashed against the truck doors as Caleb eased through potholes deep enough to swallow tires. Ghost suddenly stood. The dog planted both front paws against the dashboard. A growl rumbled deep in his throat. "I see it," Caleb muttered quietly. Ahead, beyond the sheets of rain, stood the farmhouse, or what remained of it. The two-story structure leaned slightly to one side, like an old man too tired to stand straight anymore. Parts of the roof had collapsed inward years ago. The porch sagged dangerously over flooded weeds that reached waist-high near the front steps. Dead cottonwood trees surrounded the property. One of them had split down the middle from lightning sometime long ago, leaving a blackened trunk clawing toward the sky. The barn stood farther back near the flooded tree line, huge, dark, silent, and somehow worse than the house. Even through the rain, Caleb could see parts of the roof caved inward. Rusted sheet metal peeled loose in the wind with long metallic shrieks that carried across the empty land. Ghost barked once, sharp, warning. Caleb killed the engine. For a moment, the world went completely still, except for rain hammering the truck roof. He studied the property carefully. 40 acres stretched into darkness beyond the house, most of it drowned beneath shallow floodwater, reflecting flashes of distant lightning. Deadwater Field. The name fit. Caleb had seen abandoned villages in Afghanistan that felt more welcoming than this place. Ghost refused to move. The dog remained frozen in the passenger seat, ears forward, staring toward the barn. "What do you smell?" Ghost growled again. Caleb reached into the back seat for the flashlight and stepped out into freezing rain. Mud sucked at his boots immediately. The cold wind smelled wrong somehow. Wet soil, rotting wood, and beneath it, something chemical, faint, almost buried beneath years of rain and decay. Ghost jumped down beside him, but stayed pressed tightly against Caleb's leg, instead of exploring like he normally would. That alone bothered Caleb more than the storm. Military dogs trusted environments long before humans did. If Ghost didn't trust this land, there was a reason. The porch steps groaned under Caleb's weight as he climbed toward the front door. Half the railing had collapsed years ago. Moss covered the warped boards beneath his boots. He pushed the door open slowly. The hinges screamed. Cold darkness greeted him. Rain leaked through holes in the ceiling and dripped steadily into puddles scattered across the floorboards. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long, wet strips. Mold climbed the corners of the rooms like black vines. The air smelled ancient, like the house had been sealed shut, holding its breath for decades. Ghost entered behind him carefully, but the dog never stopped watching the hallway. Caleb swept the flashlight slowly through the living room. Old furniture still sat where someone left it long ago. A couch covered in mildew, broken lamp, children's books swollen from moisture. One page lay open on the floor, a drawing of a red barn beneath a bright yellow sun. Caleb stared at it longer than he meant to. Then thunder cracked directly overhead. The sound slammed into him like an explosion. Suddenly, he wasn't inside the farmhouse anymore. He was back in Helmand Province. Dust, smoke, gunfire. A young Marine screaming for help somewhere beyond shattered concrete walls. Caleb's chest tightened violently. His breathing shortened. Not here, not now. He shut his eyes hard. But PTSD didn't care where you were. The memories came anyway. Blood in the dirt. The smell of burning metal. Radio chatter breaking apart beneath gunfire. Ghost pressed against Caleb immediately. Firm, steady, grounding him. The dog nudged Caleb's hand once with his nose exactly the way military trainers had taught him years earlier. Focus here, not there. Caleb exhaled slowly. The farmhouse came back into view piece by piece. Rain, dark walls, broken furniture. Ghost watching him carefully. "I'm all right," Caleb whispered, though his voice sounded rough. The dog didn't fully relax. Neither did Caleb. He chose the downstairs room nearest the fireplace because the ceiling looked less damaged there. After years of military deployments, he could judge structural weakness almost instinctively. He unpacked quietly while rain battered the windows. One wool blanket, camp stove, flashlight batteries, military sleeping bag. Everything he owned fit into half a room. Ghost kept pacing. Every few minutes the dog stopped and stared toward the rear windows, facing the flooded woods behind the barn, watching, listening. At one point, Ghost walked to the back door and let out a low warning growl that made the hair rise on Caleb's arms. "What is it?" the dog barked once, then silence again. Caleb finally lit a small lantern near the fireplace around midnight. Weak, orange light pushed shadows across the ruined walls, while thunder rolled farther south now beyond the fields. Ghost still refused to settle. The dog paced from window to window, claws clicking softly against warped wood floors. Then suddenly, Ghost lunged. The German Shepherd exploded toward the front hallway, barking violently. Caleb shot to his feet instantly. Years of combat training took over before thought could catch up. He grabbed the pistol from his duffel bag and moved toward the doorway. Ghost was snarling now. Not nervous barking, attack barking, focused, aggressive. Caleb stepped into the hallway. Nothing there. Only darkness. Rainwater dripping through the ceiling. Wind groaning outside then. Ghost slammed his body against the front door. Again, trying to force Caleb backward. What the hell? A massive crack exploded above them. Caleb looked up just as the porch roof collapsed. Wood and rotten beams crashed through the front section of the house in a violent shower of debris, exactly where Caleb had been standing seconds earlier. The impact shook the entire farmhouse. Dust burst through the hallway. Glass shattered outward into the rain. Caleb staggered back hard against the wall while Ghost planted himself directly between Caleb and the collapse zone, barking furiously into the cloud of dust. Silence followed. Heavy, ringing silence. Rain poured through the opening where part of the roof had caved inward. Caleb stared at the wreckage. 1 second later, and those beams would have crushed him. Ghost slowly turned toward him. Breathing hard, watching, Caleb lowered the pistol. His pulse thundered inside his ears. "You knew," he whispered. Ghost stepped closer and pressed against his leg again. Caleb crouched slowly beside the dog. For a long moment, neither moved. Outside, lightning flashed across the flooded fields. For an instant, the broken barn appeared in white light beyond the rain. And Caleb thought, just for a second, he saw a movement near the tree line behind it, a human shape, standing perfectly still beside the water, watching the house. Another flash of lightning came. Gone. Nothing there now except dead trees swaying in the storm. Caleb stood slowly. Every instinct he had learned in war whispered the same thing now. They were not alone out here. Ghost walked toward the shattered front doorway carefully and stared into the darkness beyond the rain. The dog's ears remained forward, alert, listening. Then Ghost did something Caleb had only seen him do in combat zones. The German shepherd backed away from the doorway and positioned himself directly in front of Caleb like a shield, protecting him. Thunder rolled again across Deadwater Field, while freezing rain poured through the collapsed roof. And somewhere beyond the flooded woods, hidden inside 40 abandoned acres nobody wanted, something waited in the dark that even a military dog feared. Caleb Turner barely slept. The storm lasted until dawn, hammering the farmhouse with freezing rain and brutal wind that rattled the broken walls all night long. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every groan of the old house pulled him halfway awake with his hand, reaching instinctively toward the pistol beside his sleeping bag. Ghost never closed his eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. The German shepherd remained near the shattered front hallway, watching the darkness outside, as if expecting something to emerge from the flooded fields. By morning, the storm had passed. Cold gray light spread slowly across Deadwater Field. Fog drifted low above the standing water surrounding the property, while dead trees rose through the mist like black skeletons. The ruined barn sat motionless near the flooded woods, larger now in daylight, and somehow even more unsettling. Caleb stepped outside carrying a dented coffee pot and stared across the land he had just purchased. 40 acres. Most people saw a swamp. Caleb saw something else. Possibility. Years earlier, before the Navy and before Afghanistan took pieces of him he could never fully recover, Caleb grew up on a cattle ranch in eastern Montana. His father taught him how to read land before he could drive a truck. He understood drainage patterns, soil behavior, and how floodwater moved after heavy seasons. And beneath all this standing water, the ground looked rich. Black Iowa soil, the kind farmers dreamed about. If he could drain even part of it, maybe the land could live again. Maybe he could too. Ghost suddenly barked toward the barn. Caleb looked over. The dog stood stiff beside the porch steps, ears forward, watching. Again. Still don't like that place, huh? Ghost gave a low growl. Caleb grabbed a shovel from the truck bed and started walking toward the south edge of the property, where natural runoff sloped toward an old county drainage ditch. Mud sucked hard at his boots while cold wind pushed through the flooded grass around his knees. The work felt good, painfully good. For the first time in months, his body had purpose again. Dig, lift, move, focus, no memories, no nightmares, just work. Ghost followed close beside him at first, but every few minutes the dog stopped to sniff the air uneasily toward the tree line beyond the barn. Around noon, Caleb paused beside the truck to drink water from a thermos. That was when he noticed the old pickup parked along the gravel road. Rusted red Chevy, engine off. A young man sat inside watching him. Caleb straightened slowly. The truck door opened after a moment. The driver climbed out carefully, raising both hands slightly, like he understood exactly how threatening a strange man approaching isolated property could look. He was tall and thin, maybe mid-20s, with shaggy brown hair and tired eyes. His denim jacket looked too light for the cold weather, and his boots were caked in old mud. Ghost immediately moved in front of Caleb, silent, protective. The young man stopped walking. "Easy," he said softly. "I'm not looking for trouble." Ghost growled anyway. Caleb rested one hand lightly against the dog's neck. "What do you need?" The young man glanced toward the drainage trench Caleb had started. "Heard somebody bought Deadwater Field. News travels fast. Small town." The young man nodded awkwardly. "My name's Wyatt Mercer." Caleb waited. Wyatt shoved his hands deeper into his jacket pockets. I heard you might need help. With what? Looks like you're trying to drain half the county. Despite himself, Caleb almost smiled. Almost. You know anything about land work? I know how to work, Wyatt answered honestly. That's about it. Ghost continued, staring hard at him. Wyatt noticed. Dog doesn't trust me much. He doesn't trust anyone much. Wyatt looked toward the farmhouse. You really staying out here? For now. People in town say this place is cursed. People in town also talk too much. That earned a small laugh from Wyatt. The young man seemed nervous but not dangerous. Caleb recognized the look immediately. Lost. He had seen it in veterans after deployment. Seen it in drifters sleeping behind gas stations near truck stops across the Midwest. Men disconnected from the world around them. What happened to your truck? Caleb asked. Transmission's dying. You got family nearby? Wyatt hesitated too long before answering. No. Caleb nodded slowly. Didn't press. You use a shovel? Yeah, $15 an hour. Food if there's enough. Wyatt blinked slightly, like he hadn't expected kindness. That's fair. Don't thank me yet. Work's miserable. Wyatt smiled faintly. Still sounds better than sleeping in Walmart parking lots. For the first time, Ghost stopped growling. Not relaxed, but curious. That afternoon, the two men worked the drainage trench together, beneath low gray skies, while Ghost patrolled constantly around them. Wyatt turned out stronger than he looked. Quiet, too. The kind of quiet that usually came from surviving hard years young. By late afternoon, they had widened nearly 30 feet of runoff channel toward the county ditch. Water already moved differently across the property. Caleb noticed it immediately. The land wanted to drain, like it had been trapped underwater against its own nature for years. You really think this'll work? Wyatt asked while wiping mud from his hands. Caleb studied the flooded fields. Yeah. Why? Because this ground's too good to stay dead forever. Wyatt looked out across the swamp. Most people would see nothing but ruined land. But Caleb noticed the young man studying the fields differently now, trying to imagine what could be underneath. Ghost suddenly barked sharply. Both men turned. The dog stood near the collapsed grain silo north of the barn, rigid, alert. Then Ghost began digging furiously. Mud sprayed behind him. What's he doing? Wyatt asked. Caleb was already moving. By the time they reached the silo, Ghost had dug nearly 2 feet into the mud beside a broken concrete slab buried beneath weeds and floodwater. The dog snarled once and pawed harder. Caleb crouched beside the hole. Something metal glinted beneath the mud. He reached down carefully and pulled it free. A flashlight, old military issue. Army green casing coated in rust. Caleb's stomach tightened immediately. This isn't farm equipment. Wyatt leaned closer. How can you tell? Because I carried one almost exactly like it overseas. Ghost barked again. Then dug deeper. A horrible smell rose from the mud. Rot, decay. Wyatt stepped back. Oh, God. Partially buried beneath the black water lay a boot. Human, still laced. Still attached to part of a leg bone disappearing into the mud below. Silence fell hard across the flooded property. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Wyatt looked pale suddenly. That's a person. Ghost backed away from the hole, wung softly now. Not aggressive anymore. Uneasy. Caleb stared at the remains. The boot looked old. Very old. Not recent. But the feeling crawling up his spine had nothing to do with age. He looked slowly toward the flooded woods beyond the barn. Something about this place felt wrong in ways he couldn't explain yet. Wyatt swallowed hard. We should call the sheriff. Yeah. But Caleb didn't move right away, because beside the boot, half buried beneath the mud, he noticed something else. A rusted metal chain. Thick, industrial, leading down into the earth beneath the silo. Ghost began growling again. Low, fearful, like the dog understood something Caleb didn't yet. The sun had started dropping behind the flooded tree line by the time they covered the remains with an old tarp and marked the locations beside the silo. Wyatt drove into town to contact the sheriff from the diner payphone, since Caleb's phone barely held signal out there. Darkness came fast afterward. Too fast. By 6:30, the property had disappeared beneath rolling fog, drifting across the standing water. Caleb lit a lantern inside the farmhouse, while Ghost paced restlessly near the windows. Every few minutes, the dog stopped and stared towards the road, watching, listening. Then, finally, headlights. A vehicle sat parked far down the gravel road near the entrance to Deadwater Field. Engine running, motionless. Caleb narrowed his eyes through the cracked window, couldn't make out the driver. Just silhouette and headlights glowing through fog. Ghost's growl deepened instantly. The vehicle remained there for nearly 5 minutes, watching the farmhouse, then slowly backed away into darkness without ever approaching closer. Caleb stood motionless beside the window long after the lights disappeared. His military instincts screamed now. Someone already knew about this land, and someone did not want strangers digging into it. Ghost moved beside him quietly. The dog's fur stood raised along his spine again. Then, from somewhere deep beyond the flooded woods, came a sound. Not animal, not wind, metal. A long, hollow metallic bang, echoing faintly through the darkness beneath the Deadwater Field. Ghost immediately stepped backward from the window, whining softly, fearfully. And for the first time since arriving in Iowa, Caleb Turner felt something he had not felt since combat overseas. Not loneliness, not grief. Danger, real danger. Caleb Turner stood motionless beside the farmhouse window while fog drifted across Deadwater Field like smoke rolling over water. The metallic sound echoed again somewhere deep in the flooded woods. Bang, hollow, distant. Ghost backed farther away from the door, whining low in his throat now. That frightened Caleb more than the sound itself. Military dogs feared very little. Ghost had walked through gunfire overseas. He had searched buildings, rigged with explosives, without hesitation. But something out there in those woods unsettled him in a completely different way. Caleb checked the pistol again out of instinct. Full magazine, safety off. The old habits never left. Outside, darkness swallowed nearly everything beyond the porch. The ruined barn stood barely visible against the fog, its broken roof cutting jagged shapes against the cloudy sky. Then silence returned. Heavy silence. The kind that presses against your ears until every small sound feels wrong. Ghost finally stopped growling around midnight, but he still refused to settle. Every few minutes the dog walked room to room checking windows, pausing longest at the backside of the farmhouse, facing the flooded tree line, watching. Always watching. Caleb tried sleeping. But sleep rarely came easy anymore. The Navy had trained him to stay alert in dangerous places. PTSD made sure that training never fully turned off. At some point near 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally dragged him under, and immediately the dreams came. Afghanistan. Dust storms. Gunfire cracking through ruined streets. Caleb running towards smoke with Ghost beside him, while radio chatter screamed through static in his ear. Then the Marine, young, bleeding, trapped beneath shattered concrete after an explosion. Caleb remembered trying to reach him while bullets tore through walls around them. Remembered the boy grabbing his arm. "Don't leave me." But Caleb couldn't pull him free. The ceiling had started collapsing. The order came through the radio. Fall back now. He still remembered the sound of the boy screaming after they retreated. Even after all these years, Caleb woke violently, breathing hard, sweat cold against his neck. The farmhouse was dark except for pale moonlight leaking through broken windows. Ghost stood beside him instantly, alert, concerned. The German shepherd pressed against Caleb until his breathing slowed again. Outside, wind moved softly through dead grass. Caleb rubbed one hand across his face. "Sorry, buddy." Ghost stayed close. Caleb glanced toward the old digital watch beside his sleeping bag. 4:12 a.m. No point trying to sleep again. He pulled on his jacket and stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, while Ghost followed tightly beside him. Cold air hit hard. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the flooded property silver beneath moonlight and drifting fog. The silence felt endless. Caleb walked slowly toward the drainage trench they had started the day before. Water already moved through it in a thin, steady current toward the county ditch. Good. The land wanted to breathe again. Ghost suddenly stopped walking. The dog stared toward the flooded woods beyond the barn. Rigid, then he barked once. Sharp. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then movement. Something pale drifting between the trees. A figure. Human-shaped. Gone almost immediately behind the fog. Caleb raised the flashlight fast. Nothing there. Only dead trunks standing in shallow black water. Ghost growled harder now. The dog began pulling toward the woods. No. Ghost ignored him. The German shepherd moved faster across the muddy ground until Caleb had no choice but to follow. They passed the barn carefully. Up close, the structure looked enormous. Rusted metal siding hung loose along one wall, while sections of roof sagged inward dangerously. Wind moved through the gaps with long, low whistles. Ghost barely glanced at it. Whatever he sensed lay deeper in the woods. Floodwater spread ankle-deep beneath the trees as Caleb followed the dog across rotting leaves and tangled brush. The flashlight beam cut through fog in narrow, pale tunnels. Then Ghost stopped suddenly beside an old wooden bridge. Caleb almost missed it beneath the weeds. The bridge stretched over a narrow drainage creek, disappearing into the flooded timber beyond the property. Most of the boards had rotted away years ago, leaving only warped beams slick with moss. Ghost stood at the edge, growling softly. Caleb crouched beside the water. Immediately he smelled it. Chemical odor, faint but unmistakable. Not gasoline, not fertilizer. Something industrial, something wrong. The water beneath the bridge carried oily rainbow streaks across its surface. Caleb touched the mud carefully with 2 fingers. Sticky black, Ghost barked sharply, then suddenly backed away from the creek itself, like even the dog didn't want to go near the water. Caleb stood slowly. His military instincts sharpened instantly now. He had smelled chemicals like this before near burn pits overseas. Toxic runoff, buried waste, something hidden beneath the land. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the woods. Caleb spun immediately toward the sound. Flashlight raised. Nothing. Then another sound. Footsteps, soft, moving away through shallow water. Ghost exploded into barking. The dog lunged forward across the bridge before Caleb grabbed the leash hard. Ghost! The German shepherd strained violently against him, barking into darkness while something crashed through brush farther ahead. Human movement, running. Caleb's pulse surged. Hey! No answer. Only splashing footsteps retreating through fog. Then silence again. Ghost kept growling long after the sounds disappeared. Caleb stared into the woods. Someone had absolutely been out there, watching. The eastern horizon had just started turning gray by the time they returned to the farmhouse. Wyatt's pickup arrived an hour later, carrying 2 gas cans and breakfast sandwiches from town. The young man immediately noticed Caleb's expression. You look like hell. Didn't sleep much. Wyatt handed him coffee. Sheriff's coming later about the remains near the silo. Caleb nodded distractedly. Ghost stood near the porch staring toward the woods again. Wyatt followed the dog's gaze. He's been doing that all morning? All night, too. Caleb finally told him about the bridge. The chemical smell, the footsteps. Wyatt listened quietly. Then he glanced toward the flooded tree line uneasily. You think somebody's living out there? No. What then? Caleb looked toward the woods again. I think somebody doesn't want us here. The words hung cold in the morning air. Wyatt tried laughing it off but failed. Together they spent the morning widening the drainage trench while fog slowly burned away beneath weak November sunlight. The work helped steady Caleb's nerves. Digging always did. Simple tasks. Clear goals. No memories. Ghost stayed nearby, but never relaxed fully. Around noon, the dog wandered back toward the barn alone. A few minutes later, he started barking again. Caleb and Wyatt exchanged looks, then headed after him. They found Ghost standing beside the barn's north wall near a pile of collapsed boards buried beneath vines and rusted equipment. The dog pawed furiously at the ground. What now? Wyatt muttered. Caleb moved debris carefully aside with the shovel. Beneath the rotten boards lay something strange. Not farm equipment, concrete. A narrow rectangular slab mostly hidden beneath dirt and weeds. Ghost barked harder. Caleb brushed mud away slowly. Metal hinges appeared along one edge. Wyatt stared. That looks like a hatch, Caleb finished quietly. But unlike the silo discovery, this hatch looked deliberate. Military, almost. Heavy reinforced steel beneath decades of rust. No visible handle. Just a faded warning symbol, nearly worn away by time. Ghost suddenly whimpered. The dog backed away from the hatch itself. Tail low now. Fear again. Caleb crouched beside the metal surface. Cold wind moved through the broken barn overhead, while loose sheet metal groaned somewhere above them. Then Caleb noticed the scratches. Deep grooves carved into the rust near the hatch edge. Not random. Words, barely visible beneath dirt. He brushed carefully across the surface. Wyatt leaned closer beside him. Together they slowly made out the faded message scratched into the steel long ago. Don't open. The wind died completely around the barn. No birds, no insects, nothing. Ghost stared at the hatch, trembling slightly beneath his fur. And somewhere below them, far underground, beneath 40 flooded acres, everyone feared. Something metallic echoed once more through the earth. Bang. The sound vibrated faintly beneath Caleb Turner's boots. Not loud, not close, but real. Ghost backed farther away from the hatch beneath the barn wall, ears pinned tight against his head now. The German shepherd let out a low, uneasy whine Caleb had never heard before outside combat zones. Wyatt stared at the rusted steel slab in silence.
You hear that too?
Yeah. The cold wind moved through the broken barn roof with a hollow whistle. Caleb crouched beside the hatch again, studying every inch carefully. Rust coated most of the surface, but the construction underneath looked heavy-duty. Industrial-grade steel, reinforced edges, military style. This wasn't some farmer's storm shelter. And the words scratched into the rust. Don't open. They looked desperate, like whoever carved them had done it fast. Fearfully, Ghost suddenly barked sharply toward the tree line. All three of them turned. Movement flickered briefly between dead trees beyond the flooded woods, then vanished. Wyatt swallowed hard. Somebody's out there again. Caleb kept staring toward the woods, yeah. Neither man moved for several seconds. Then Caleb stood. We leave it closed for now. Wyatt looked relieved by that answer. Good. Ghost kept growling softly at the hatch, while Caleb dragged old boards and scrap metal back over it carefully, hiding it again beneath debris exactly the way they found it. But even covered, the thing felt wrong, like the earth itself was hiding a wound underneath Deadwater Field. By noon, Sheriff Don Keller finally arrived. His patrol truck rolled slowly up the muddy road while fog still drifted over parts of the flooded property. The sheriff climbed out heavily, pulling his coat tighter against the wind. He looked exhausted before he even reached the farmhouse. Late 60s, broad shoulders softened by age, face weathered like old leather. Ghost watched him carefully, but didn't growl. That alone told Caleb something. Sheriff Kilker removed his hat slowly while studying the land. Hell of a place you bought. So people keep telling me, the sheriff grunted. Wyatt showed him the remains near the silo. Keller crouched beside the tarp quietly for a long moment after uncovering the boot and partial bones. His expression tightened immediately. Been here a long time. You recognize the flashlight? Caleb asked. The sheriff looked at the rusted military light carefully. No. But something in his face shifted too quickly afterward. Caleb noticed. Military training taught observation before anything else. The sheriff had reacted, only for half a second. But enough. Keller covered the remains again. I'll call state forensics. Might take a few days. You think it's connected to the missing hunts people talked about? The sheriff stood slowly. People around here talk too much. Same answer everyone gave. Avoidance. Caleb folded his arms. What happened on this property? Keller looked toward the flooded woods. For the first time since arriving, Caleb saw genuine discomfort in another man's eyes when they looked at Deadwater Field. Finally, the sheriff sighed. You planning on staying here long? Maybe. That make you the first person in 20 years. Wyatt glanced uneasily toward the barn. Why? Keller hesitated, then shook his head. Small towns build stories around places like this. Folks lose livestock, hear strange noises. Somebody disappears after too much whiskey in deer season. Fear fills in the blanks. You don't believe that? I believe this land should been left alone. The sheriff walked back toward his truck after that, but before climbing inside, he paused beside Caleb. Quiet enough that Wyatt couldn't hear. If your dog keeps acting nervous, Keller muttered, pay attention to him. Then he drove away. Caleb watched the patrol truck disappear down the muddy road while cold wind rolled across the flooded fields. Ghost remained staring toward the woods, watching, always watching. That afternoon, Wyatt headed into Black Hollow for fuel and supplies, while Caleb stayed behind widening the drainage channels another few feet. The work helped clear his head. Mud, water, simple problems, not memories. By late afternoon, the flooded edges near the farmhouse had already dropped nearly an inch. The land was changing, breathing again, and somehow that seemed to make Ghost more uneasy instead of less. Around sunset, Caleb finally drove into town himself, mostly for coffee. Partly because isolation was beginning to press too heavily against his nerves. Black Hollow looked exactly like 100 other small Midwestern towns trying desperately not to disappear. One traffic light, feed store, church steeple, hardware shop, old diner glowing warm beneath neon lights, Martha's Grill. Caleb parked beside a rusted grain truck and stepped inside. Heat and the smell of frying onions hit him immediately. The diner was nearly empty except for two farmers drinking coffee near the counter, and an elderly waitress, wiping tables slowly beneath yellow hanging lights. Ghost entered beside Caleb calmly this time, though several customers still looked nervous seeing such a large dog. The waitress glanced up, then smiled faintly. You must be the veteran who bought Deadwater Field. News traveled frighteningly fast in Black Hollow. Caleb slid into a booth. Guess so. The waitress poured coffee without asking. Name tag read, Martha. She looked somewhere in her 70s. Gray hair pinned neatly back, sharp blue eyes that missed very little. Ghost settled beneath the booth but kept watching the windows. Martha noticed. That dog's military. Retired explosives detection. She looked toward the dark windows thoughtfully. He doesn't like that land much. Caleb studied her carefully. You know something about it? Martha kept wiping the table a moment longer before answering. My husband used to. That got Caleb's attention. Martha finally sat across from him with her own coffee cup. Outside, wind rattled the diner windows softly. You ever hear the name Leon Vance? She asked. Caleb shook his head. Engineer. Vietnam veteran. Lived out on Deadwater back in the 70s. Ghost lifted his head slightly at the name. Martha noticed that too. Leon came home from Vietnam angry at the whole world, she continued quietly. Smart man, though. Real smart. Worked construction, water systems, environmental projects. What happened to him? He started asking questions nobody wanted asked. The diner suddenly felt quieter. Even the farmers at the counter stopped talking. Martha lowered her voice further. Back then, some big agricultural companies were dumping chemical waste all over rural Iowa. Cheap disposal. Quiet disposal. Caleb remembered the smell beneath the bridge immediately. Leon found out? He claimed runoff from Deadwater was poisoning groundwater south of town. Said cattle were getting sick. Said people were too. What did the county do? Martha laughed bitterly. Same thing counties always do when powerful people get nervous. Ghost gave a low growl beneath the table. Martha glanced down at him. He vanished 3 months later. Silence settled heavily over the booth. Caleb stared at her. Nobody? Nobody. What about police? Sheriff back then ruled it accidental drowning. You believe that? Martha looked toward the diner windows where darkness covered the Iowa fields outside. No. The word came quietly. Absolutely. She leaned closer. After Leon disappeared, people started hearing things out there. What kind of things? Metal sounds beneath the ground. Strange lights in the flooded woods, livestock refusing to cross near the creek. Ghost's ears stood straight up now. Martha noticed. Then her expression changed slightly. He reacts every time we mention the land. He smelled something under the bridge this morning. Martha went still. What kind of smell? Chemicals. For the first time, genuine fear crossed the old woman's face. You need to be careful out there. Caleb held her gaze. I found human remains near the silo. The coffee cup nearly slipped from Martha's hand. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then finally, Leon wore army boots. The words landed hard between them. Ghost stood slowly beneath the table, growling again. Not at Martha, at the windows. Caleb turned immediately. Outside across the street, a black pickup truck sat parked beneath a dead streetlight. Engine running, windows tinted dark, watching the diner. The moment Caleb looked directly toward it, the truck pulled away fast. Martha noticed his expression. They've been asking about you. Who? Men in suits. Out-of-town plates started showing up after the auction. Caleb's pulse slowed in that dangerous controlled way combat veterans know too well. Not panic, preparation. Why? Because you started digging. Ghost barked once sharply. Every customer inside the diner jumped slightly. Outside, snowflakes had begun drifting slowly through the dark Iowa air. Winter was coming early, and for the first time since buying Deadwater Field, Caleb Turner realized something terrifying. The land had never truly been abandoned. Someone had simply been making sure nobody stayed long enough to uncover what was buried there. Snow began falling harder during the drive back from Black Hollow. By the time Caleb Turner turned onto the muddy county road leading toward Deadwater Field, white flakes swirled across the headlights, thick enough to blur the world beyond the windshield. Ghost sat rigid beside him, watching, always watching. The German Shepherd had barely relaxed since leaving the diner. Every passing set of headlights made his ears rise. Every unfamiliar sound pulled a low growl from deep inside his chest. Caleb understood the feeling. His nerves felt stretched tight, too. The black pickup outside Martha's diner hadn't been coincidence. Neither were the footsteps in the woods, or the hidden hatch, or the remains beside the silo. Somewhere inside the darkness surrounding Deadwater Field, pieces of something larger were beginning to move, and Caleb had walked directly into the middle of it. The farmhouse emerged slowly through the snowfall ahead. Dark, leaning, lone wind pushed through broken windows with soft, mournful whistles while snow gathered along the collapsed porch roof. The flooded fields around the property had turned silver beneath the storm clouds. Ghost barked once sharply the moment Caleb parked. The dog jumped from the truck immediately and trotted toward the barn before Caleb even shut the engine off. Ghost! The German Shepherd ignored him. Caleb grabbed the flashlight and followed quickly through the snow. The barn loomed ahead like some wounded animal dying slowly in the dark. Wind rattled loose sheets of rusted metal overhead while snow drifted through holes in the roof. Ghost stood near the north wall again, exactly where the hatch lay hidden beneath debris, growling. Caleb swept the flashlight slowly around the barn interior. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched returned immediately. He hated that feeling, because after years in war zones, Caleb trusted instincts more than facts. And every instinct he had screamed the same thing now. Someone else knew about the hatch. Wyatt's truck headlights appeared through the snowfall minutes later. The young man climbed out, carrying bolt cutters, a pry bar, and a thermos of coffee. You called like somebody died. Maybe somebody did. Wyatt glanced uneasily toward the barn. You still thinking about opening that thing tonight? Caleb looked toward Ghost. The dog hadn't moved an inch. Yes, bad idea. Probably. Snow hissed softly against the barn roof while both men pulled boards and rusted junk away from the hidden hatch again. The steel slab looked even stranger beneath fresh flashlight beams. Military gray beneath the rust, heavy-duty hinges, reinforced corners, not civilian construction. Ghost backed away the moment the hatch became fully exposed. Tail low, whining quietly now, Wyatt noticed immediately. That dog really hates this thing. He smells something. Like what? Caleb stared at the steel. Don't know yet. The bolt cutters snapped uselessly against the thick rusted chain securing the hatch shut. Too heavy, Wyatt muttered under his breath. Caleb finally used the pry bar against the lock housing itself while Wyatt held the flashlight steady. Metal groaned loudly beneath pressure. Then, crack, the old lock snapped apart. Ghost barked violently, not warning panic. The German Shepherd retreated almost to the barn entrance itself. Caleb paused with one hand on the hatch edge. Cold air moved strangely through the gaps around the steel, breathing upward. From underground, Wyatt swallowed hard. You smell that? Caleb nodded slowly. Chemicals again. Stronger this time. Mixed with old damp concrete and something stale beneath it all. Like trapped air sealed underground for decades. Ready? Caleb asked. No, Wyatt answered honestly. Together they pulled. The hatch screamed open against rusted hinges. Darkness waited below. A narrow concrete staircase disappeared underground beneath weak flashlight beams. Moisture glistened along the walls. Old pipes ran overhead, disappearing into blackness below. Ghost barked again from the far side of the barn, but he refused to come closer. Caleb descended first. Military instincts took over automatically. Slow steps, weapon ready, eyes scanning corners. Wyatt followed behind, trying unsuccessfully to hide how nervous he felt. The staircase led nearly 20 feet underground before opening into a long concrete corridor. Both men stopped immediately. The tunnel walls were lined with faded military markings, yellow warning stripes, old electrical conduits, rusting ventilation fans. Wyatt stared around wide-eyed. What the hell is this place? Caleb swept the flashlight across the corridor slowly. Every detail felt Cold War era, government construction, military engineering, the kind of underground utility systems Caleb had seen near old defense facilities overseas. This wasn't built by farmers. The tunnel stretched farther beneath the property than either flashlight could fully reach. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead. Ghost finally descended halfway down the stairs behind them, but no farther. The dog stood frozen, trembling. Caleb had never seen him like this before. Not once. Stay, Caleb whispered. Ghost obeyed immediately. Wyatt looked uneasy. If Ghost doesn't want to go down here, then we move carefully. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Concrete doors lined parts of the corridor, most hanging partially open now. Inside sat abandoned storage rooms, filled with rusted filing cabinets, broken generators, and collapsed shelves covered in dust. One room still contained old army ration crates stacked against the walls. Another held gas masks rotting inside opened containers. Wyatt picked one up carefully. Jesus. Caleb noticed dates stamped along the crate side. His pulse slowed, focused. Somebody had maintained this place long after the military supposedly abandoned it. Then the metallic sound echoed again. Bang, closer now. Both men froze. The sound came from deeper ahead, somewhere beneath the property. Wyatt whispered nervously. That's not pipes. No, they kept moving. The corridor narrowed eventually before ending at a large reinforced steel door, half hidden beneath hanging cables and fallen debris. Unlike the others, this one remained completely sealed. Ghost suddenly began barking wildly behind them. The dog's panic echoed through the tunnel. Caleb turned the flashlight toward the door and saw the writing scratched across the metal surface, deep, violent, as if carved by someone desperate. Don't let them bury the truth. Silence swallowed the tunnel afterward. Even the dripping water seemed to stop. Wyatt stared at the words pale-faced. Who wrote that? Caleb moved closer carefully. Beneath the scratches sat another detail almost hidden beneath rust. A military nameplate bolted beside the door. Leon Vance. The air inside the tunnel suddenly felt colder. Much colder. Ghost let out a long, low whine from the stairwell. Then another sound came from behind the sealed steel door. Soft, almost impossible to hear. A faint, mechanical clicking. Like something old still trying to run beneath the earth after decades underground. Wyatt stepped backward immediately. Nope, Caleb remained motionless, listening. The clicking stopped. Then came another sound. Human, a voice. Weak, distorted, barely audible through the steel. Wyatt's face drained completely of color. "You heard that, right?" Caleb nodded slowly. Ghost began barking frantically now. The dog was trying to warn them, begging them to leave. Then suddenly, every light inside the corridor flickered once. Both men froze. A deep electrical hum rolled through the tunnel walls beneath their feet. Somewhere farther underground, something had just powered on. The low electrical hum rolled through the tunnel walls beneath Caleb Turner's boots like distant thunder trapped underground. Wyatt stepped backward immediately. Oh, hell no. The flashlight in his trembling hand shook across the concrete corridor while Ghost barked frantically from the stairwell above. The German Shepherd had fully abandoned discipline now. Not fear alone, urgency. Like the dog understood something neither man did. Caleb stared at the sealed steel door marked with Leon Vance's nameplate, while every military instinct inside him sharpened to a knife edge. The hum continued, steady, mechanical, alive. Then suddenly, a weak fluorescent light flickered somewhere farther down the corridor behind them. Both men spun around instantly. A single overhead fixture buzzed dimly to life. Then another, and another. Old emergency lighting blinked awake one section at a time beneath Deadwater Field, casting pale yellow light through the abandoned bunker. Dust drifted slowly through the air like smoke. Wyatt whispered softly. "How is this possible?" Caleb didn't answer, because he was thinking the same thing. This place should have been dead decades ago. Yet somehow power still existed somewhere below them. Ghost barked again sharply. Caleb finally backed away from the sealed steel door. "Move," neither man argued. They retreated slowly through the corridor while old lights buzzed weakly overhead. The bunker felt different now. Awake, the deeper silence had disappeared. Now they could hear machinery somewhere below. Faint ventilation systems, water pumps maybe. Old systems still functioning beneath the property after all these years. Wyatt kept glancing over his shoulder nervously. "You think somebody's down here? I think somebody was. That doesn't help." They reached one of the side storage rooms and Caleb stopped abruptly. The flickering lights now revealed details they had missed earlier, in flashlight beams alone. Maps covered one wall, large survey maps of Iowa farmland, drainage systems, water tables, chemical notations scribbled across corners in faded ink. Metal shelves held dozens of dusty binders stacked carefully beneath years of grime. And in the center of the room sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder connected to old batteries and wires running through the wall. The machine itself was off, but beside it rested cassette tapes labeled carefully by hand. Leon Vance, field notes. Caleb stared silently. Wyatt swallowed hard. This whole place was his. Ghost finally descended farther into the corridor, though reluctantly. The dog moved slowly now, sniffing every corner carefully with his tail low. Caleb picked up the nearest cassette. Dust coated the label. Date: October 14, 1978. He found an old portable tape player nearby, half buried beneath papers. Miraculously, when he connected the battery wires, the device clicked on. Static crackled softly through tiny speakers. Then a man's voice emerged, tired, older, nervous. "If anybody finds these recordings, don't trust county reports." Wyatt froze. The voice continued through static. "My name is Leon Vance, former Army Corps engineer assigned to groundwater monitoring near Black Hollow agricultural sector." Caleb sat slowly against the wall, listening. Ghost remained standing beside him, alert and uneasy. Leon coughed heavily on the tape. The contamination spread farther than they predicted. They buried thousands of gallons beneath the wetlands after the government contracts expired. Wyatt looked horrified. "What contamination?" The tape answered him seconds later. "Industrial solvents, chemical runoff, waste compounds from military disposal programs moved through private contractors after Vietnam." Caleb's chest tightened slightly. Military disposal. Of course. The recording crackled louder. "I warned them. The soil couldn't contain it forever." Deadwater was chosen because flooding would hide leakage patterns. The standing water became cover. Ghost suddenly growled low beneath the tape's static. Then Leon's voice changed. Fear entered it. They threatened me today. Silence crackled briefly. If something happens to me, the evidence stays below the barn. Do not let them bury the truth. The recording ended with soft static. Neither man spoke for several seconds afterward. The old bunker lights buzzed overhead. Water dripped steadily somewhere in darkness beyond the corridor. Finally, Wyatt whispered, "They killed him." Caleb stared at the tape recorder, maybe because he understood Leon Vance too well already. A veteran who came home believing truth mattered. A man who trusted systems that erased people when convenient. Caleb had seen that same machinery before. In war, in government briefings, in folded flags handed to families while politicians moved on without remembering names. Ghost nudged Caleb's arm softly, grounding him again, because memories had started moving behind Caleb's eyes once more. Afghanistan. Reports rewritten after failed operations. Civilian casualties buried beneath classified paperwork. Young soldiers forgotten after cameras disappeared. Corruption wearing uniforms. Caleb rubbed one hand slowly across his face. "You all right?" Wyatt asked carefully. "Yeah, but he wasn't. Not really." The tape had cracked something open inside him. Ghost suddenly barked sharply toward the rear of the storage room. Both men turned. A collapsed concrete section lay partly hidden beneath fallen shelves. The dog moved toward it cautiously, sniffing hard. Then he started digging. Caleb stood immediately. Ghost. The German shepherd pawed harder against loose debris, growling now. Wyatt helped move broken shelving aside, while Caleb swept the flashlight deeper into the collapsed section. Then he saw it. Bone, human, partially buried beneath rubble. Wyatt recoiled immediately. "Oh my God," Ghost backed away, whining softly. The remains looked old, very old. A human skeleton trapped beneath collapsed concrete near the tunnel wall. One skeletal hand still wore a rusted wristwatch. Nearby sat another flashlight, army issue, same style as the one near the silo. Caleb crouched slowly beside the remains. His pulse had gone cold now, because beside the bones lay a cracked military ID badge barely visible beneath dust. He brushed dirt carefully away. Leon Vance. Silence swallowed the bunker. Wyatt stared pale-faced at the remains. They left him down here. Ghost let out a low, mournful sound unlike anything Caleb had heard before. Not fear, sadness. The German shepherd stepped closer carefully and sniffed at the old bones once, before sitting beside them quietly, like standing guard. Caleb's throat tightened unexpectedly. Leon Vance had died alone beneath the very land he tried to protect, buried, forgotten, hidden beneath floodwater and silence for nearly 40 years. The realization hit Caleb harder than he expected, because suddenly he saw himself too clearly in that darkness. Another veteran, discarded after usefulness expired. Another man the world stopped listening to. Another broken soldier trying desperately to hold on to purpose. Wyatt looked toward him carefully. "What do we do now?" Caleb stared at Leon's remains, then at the tapes, then at the maps lining the walls. "We finish what he started." The words came quietly. Absolutely. Ghost suddenly stood again, ears forward, growling not at the remains, at the tunnel behind them. Both men turned instantly. Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere deeper in the bunker. Slow, measured, not theirs. The overhead lights flickered again. Once, twice. Then every light inside the corridor went black. Darkness slammed over them completely. Wyatt cursed loudly. Ghost erupted into violent barking. And, somewhere in the pitch-black tunnel ahead, a metal door opened. The sound echoed through the bunker like a gunshot. Ghost lunged instantly into the darkness, barking with explosive fury, while Wyatt nearly dropped the flashlight in panic. "Ghost!" Caleb swept his beam toward the corridor, just in time to catch movement. A shadow. Human-sized, crossing the far end of the tunnel, then gone. The old emergency lights flickered weakly back to life overhead for half a second before dying again. The bunker plunged into darkness once more. Ghost's barking became savage now, protective, combat trained. The kind Caleb had only heard during raids overseas. Wyatt stumbled backward against the concrete wall. "Somebody's down here!" Caleb already knew. His body had shifted automatically into the old rhythm of danger. Breathing slowed, vision sharpened, every sound separated cleanly inside his mind. Years after leaving the SEAL teams, the instincts remained buried under the scars, waiting for moments exactly like this. Ghost barked deeper into the corridor, then suddenly yelped. Not pain, impact, like he'd collided with something moving fast in the dark. Caleb moved immediately. Flashlight up, weapon steady. The beam finally caught a figure sprinting deeper into the bunker corridor ahead. Black jacket, boots splashing through shallow water along the concrete floor. Male. Running. Stop! The figure disappeared around a corner. Ghost tore after him without hesitation. Ghost. Caleb and Wyatt followed fast. The tunnel twisted sharply beneath the flooded property, revealing sections they had not explored yet. Rusted pipes lined the ceiling overhead, while old warning signs peeled from the walls. Biohazard storage. Authorized access only. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as Caleb ran. Somewhere ahead, metal doors slammed open and shut. Ghosts barking echoed through the darkness. Then, silence. Caleb rounded another corner hard and nearly collided with the dog. Ghost stood rigid in the center of a massive underground chamber. The room looked like an old maintenance bay or loading area. Cracked concrete floors stretched beneath rusted machinery and abandoned barrels stacked along one wall. A large freight elevator sat dead at the far end of the chamber beneath hanging chains coated in rust. But nobody else remained inside. The figure had vanished. Wyatt arrived seconds later, breathing hard. Where'd he go? Caleb swept the flashlight slowly around the room, then noticed fresh footprints disappearing through another steel doorway near the elevator. Not old, recent. Someone had absolutely been inside the bunker recently. Ghost growled toward the open doorway. Caleb moved closer carefully. The room beyond turned out to be an office, or what used to be one. Metal desks sat overturned across the floor beneath collapsed ceiling tiles. Filing cabinets had been ripped open violently. Papers covered everything like snowdrifts. But one thing immediately stood out. Somebody had been here very recently. Dust was disturbed. Boot tracks crossed the floor, and near the center desk sat a modern flashlight, still warm to the touch. Wyatt stared at it. "Oh, that's bad." Caleb looked around carefully. Then he noticed the empty shelves. Whoever entered the bunker wasn't exploring. They were searching. Ghost moved toward the back wall, growling low again. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. A map had been pinned there beneath cracked plastic covering. Large, detailed. Sections of Iowa farmland marked in red circles. Deadwater Field sat directly at the center. Beside it, someone had written one sentence in black marker years ago. Leakage spread uncontainable after 1981. Wyatt swallowed hard. This wasn't just dumping. No. Caleb stared at the map. This was cover-up. A drawer suddenly slammed somewhere behind them. All three spun instantly. Another figure darted through the maintenance bay outside. This time, Caleb saw enough. Tall man, dark coat, flashlight in hand, running toward the freight elevator. Ghost exploded forward. The German Shepherd hit the man hard enough to knock him sideways into rusted machinery. Metal crashed violently through the chamber. The stranger shouted in surprise. Caleb reached them seconds later. Ghost pinned the man against the concrete, snarling inches from his face. "Don't move." The flashlight rolled across the floor, revealing a middle-aged man beneath Ghost's weight. Expensive coat, clean boots, not local, not some drifter. The man raised, shaking hands carefully. "Get your damn dog off me. Who are you?" The stranger looked toward the exit desperately. Ghost growled louder. "My name's Harold Pike." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why are you in my bunker?" Pike forced a nervous smile. "Technically, this property belongs to Hawthorne Agricultural Holdings under disputed environmental review." That's not an answer. Pike's calm facade cracked slightly. "You shouldn't be down here." Wyatt laughed bitterly. "Pretty sure you're the one trespassing." Pike ignored him completely. His eyes stayed fixed on Caleb now. How much do you want? Silence filled the chamber. Ghost's growl deepened. Caleb stared at him coldly. For what? The land. Wyatt looked stunned. You're trying to buy him out? Pike slowly pushed himself upright once. Ghost backed away slightly on Caleb's command. Snowmelt dripped steadily through cracks in the ceiling overhead while the old bunker groaned softly around them. Pike straightened his coat. You're a veteran, Mr. Turner. You've had hard years. Everybody knows that. His voice softened carefully. This property can become a problem you don't need. Caleb said nothing. Pike continued. My company is prepared to offer you $50,000 for Deadwater Field immediately. Wyatt's eyes widened. $50,000 was life-changing money around Black Hollow, especially for a homeless veteran living inside a collapsing farmhouse. But Caleb barely reacted. Because Pike wasn't offering money, he was offering fear. Why? Caleb asked quietly. Pike smiled thinly. Because some places are better left alone. Ghost suddenly barked viciously again. The dog had moved toward the office doorway, listening. Then Caleb heard it too. Vehicles. Outside. Engines multiple. Pike's face changed instantly. Not fear, recognition. Caleb stepped toward him sharply. Who else came with you? Pike didn't answer. The freight elevator chamber suddenly echoed with heavy footsteps above them near the barn. Several people. Moving fast. Wyatt whispered nervously. Caleb. Ghost raced toward the staircase, barking wildly. Caleb grabbed Pike by the jacket. Who's up there? Pike finally looked afraid now. Not my decision anymore. Then all hell broke loose overhead. A massive crash echoed down the stairwell, followed by splintering wood and shouted voices. Ghost attacked immediately. The sounds above turned violent instantly. Barking, yelling, boots slamming through debris. Wyatt cursed. They found the hatch. Caleb shoved Pike against the wall, hard enough to stun him. Stay here. Then he ran for the stairs. Ghost met him, halfway up, covered in dust and fury. The German shepherd spun back toward the barn entrance, growling like an animal possessed. Caleb emerged into chaos. Flashlights cut through swirling snowfall inside the barn, while three masked men tore through equipment, searching frantically for something. The bunker entrance. One man spotted Caleb instantly. There he is. Ghost launched before the sentence finished. The German shepherd smashed into the closest intruder with terrifying force, driving him backward through a stack of rotten crates. Another attacker swung a metal pipe wildly toward the dog. Caleb tackled the man before the strike landed. Years of military combat training surged back through muscle memory. Fast, efficient, controlled. The attacker crashed hard into the dirt floor while Caleb ripped the pipe away and shoved him back. Snow blew violently through the broken barn walls. Now, while Ghost cornered another masked man beside old machinery, barking furiously. Wyatt burst from the hatch, carrying the flashlight like a weapon. What do we do? Call the sheriff. Phone's dead. Of course it was. The masked men suddenly retreated toward the barn entrance. Fast, disciplined, not random criminals. They moved like trained security. One of them pointed directly toward the bunker hatch before backing away. Burn it if necessary. Then they vanished into the snowstorm outside. Truck engines roared seconds later. Caleb sprinted outside just in time to see black SUVs disappearing down the county road through heavy snowfall. Gone. Ghost stood beside him in the snow, breathing hard while Wyatt emerged behind them, pale-faced. What the hell was that? Caleb stared after the disappearing taillights. Not random intimidation. Not scavengers. Organized, desperate. And now they knew exactly what Caleb had discovered beneath Deadwater Field. Behind them, inside the barn, the hidden bunker hatch remained open beneath falling snow, while cold wind rolled across the flooded Iowa fields. Ghost stayed facing the road long after the vehicles disappeared, still growling. Because deep down the dog understood something. Caleb was only beginning to realize. This was no longer about abandoned land. It was war now. Snow hammered Deadwater Field through the night. while freezing wind rolled across the flooded Iowa farmland, hard enough to shake the broken farmhouse walls. Caleb Turner sat at the kitchen table, cleaning mud from his pistol in silence. Ghost lay near the front door, watching. The German Shepherd hadn't fully relaxed once since the attack in the barn. Every gust of wind lifted his ears. Every creak from the old house pulled a growl from deep inside his chest. Wyatt sat nearby holding one of Leon Vance's cassette tapes carefully in both hands. "You think they'll come back?" Caleb slid the magazine into place calmly. Yes. The answer settled heavily into the room. Outside, snow buried the property inch by inch beneath darkness. Wyatt rubbed both hands across his face. "We should leave." Caleb looked up slowly. "You can. What about you?" Caleb stared toward the black windows. "They murdered a man and buried him beneath this land. That was 40 years ago. They're still trying to hide it." Ghost suddenly stood. Rigid, low growl. Caleb's body tightened instantly. Then, headlights appeared through the storm, far down the road. More than one vehicle. Wyatt saw them too. Oh God. The lights disappeared briefly behind drifting snow before returning closer this time. 3 vehicles, moving slowly toward the property. No sheriff. No sirens. Ghost barked violently. Caleb stood immediately. "Get the tapes." Wyatt grabbed Leon's recordings while Caleb moved toward the back room, where they'd hidden the documents from the bunker, inside old feed sacks beneath loose floorboards. Outside, engines rumbled closer through the storm. The farmhouse lights suddenly died. Darkness swallowed everything. Caleb stayed calm. But even Caleb felt his pulse spike now. Because the timing was too perfect. Someone had cut the power line. Ghost barked furiously near the front door. Then came the sound. Boots outside, crunching through snow. More than one person. Moving carefully around the farmhouse. Wyatt whispered, "They found us." Caleb handed him a flashlight. "If things go bad, you take the tapes and run east through the drainage trench. What about you? I'll slow them down." Ghost growled harder. Then the barn exploded. A massive orange flash lit the storm outside, followed by a deafening boom that rattled the farmhouse windows. Wyatt flinched violently. "What the hell was that?" Caleb already knew. Fire. The old barn roof burst into flames against the snowstorm, sending sparks twisting into the black Iowa sky. The attackers weren't searching anymore. They were destroying evidence. Ghost lunged toward the door, barking wildly. Another crash hit the farmhouse porch. Someone outside shouted, "Get the bunker!" Caleb moved instantly. Years disappeared from him in seconds. The homeless veteran vanished. The seal returned. He shoved a bookshelf sideways against the front door, while Wyatt killed every remaining lantern inside the house. Darkness covered them completely except for the fire burning outside through broken windows. Ghost stayed beside Caleb, trembling with adrenaline. Then glass shattered in the back room. One of them had entered the house. Ghost attacked instantly. A scream erupted from darkness, followed by crashing furniture and snarling violence. Caleb sprinted toward the sound. The attacker stumbled backward through the hallway, holding one arm while Ghost ripped into his heavy coat. Masked, large, military posture. Not amateurs. The man swung a flashlight hard toward the dog. Caleb tackled him before the blow landed. Both men crashed through rotten flooring into the kitchen wall. The attacker fought like trained security. Fast, disciplined. But Caleb had spent 20 years surviving worse men in worse places. He drove his elbow sharply into the attacker's ribs before wrenching the flashlight free. Ghost pinned the man, instantly snarling inches from his face. Another window shattered nearby. More intruders entering. Wyatt shouted from the back room. "They're inside!" Caleb dragged the masked man upright. "Who sent you?" The attacker spit blood onto the floor. Too late. Then suddenly flames appeared outside the kitchen windows. The barn fire had spread. Wind drove burning debris across the property directly toward the farmhouse. Ghost barked wildly. Smoke rolled through broken windows. Caleb made the decision instantly. "We move now." Wyatt grabbed the tapes and documents while Caleb kicked open the back door into the storm. Snow blasted their faces immediately. The property had become chaos. Flames consumed half the barn now, lighting Deadwater Field in violent orange against the white snowstorm. Burning embers spiraled through the wind, while dark figures moved the bunker entrance. Searching, Ghost stayed close beside Caleb's as they sprinted toward the flooded woods. Then gunfire erupted. One shotgun blast thundered through the storm. Mud exploded near Wyatt's feet. Run! The attackers advanced through snow, carrying flashlights and weapons, while fire spread across the old structures behind them. Ghost suddenly turned back toward the men. No! Too late. The German Shepherd charged directly into the storm toward the gunfire. Another blast exploded. Ghost yelped. The sound tore straight through Caleb's chest. Ghost! The dog disappeared briefly into blowing snow near the old wooden bridge. Caleb ran harder than his battered body wanted to move. Branches whipped across his face while freezing water soaked through his boots. Wyatt stumbled beside him, carrying the tapes under his jacket, desperately trying to protect them from snow. Ahead near the bridge, Ghost had reached one attacker already. The dog hit the man so hard, both disappeared into the flooded creek below. Another masked figure raised the shotgun again directly toward Caleb. Then Ghost lunged on from darkness one more time. The blast fired. Too close. The sound echoed across Deadwater Field like thunder. Ghost collapsed into the snow. Everything inside Caleb stopped. For one terrible second, the world became silent except for wind. The attackers retreated immediately after that, fast. One of them shouted, "Go, move!" Black SUVs roared alive somewhere beyond the trees. Then they were gone, leaving only fire, snow, and Ghost lying motionless beside the bridge. Caleb dropped to his knees in freezing water beside the dog. Ghost. No response. Blood stained the snow dark beneath the German Shepherd's shoulder. Wyatt reached them seconds later, pale with shock. Oh my God. Caleb's hands shook violently now, not from cold. Fear, real fear. Ghost's breathing came shallow and ragged, alive, barely. The dog tried lifting his head when Caleb touched him. Failed. No, 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 no. Caleb pressed both hands hard against the wound while snow covered them instantly. Ghost whimpered softly. The sound broke something deep inside Caleb that war never fully destroyed. Because Ghost wasn't just a dog. Ghost had carried him through nightmares, pulled him out of panic attacks, stayed beside him when his own family stopped calling. Ghost was the only reason Caleb survived some nights after coming home from war. And now the dog had taken a shotgun blast meant for him. Caleb bent over the wounded German Shepherd while tears mixed with melting snow across his face. Stay with me, buddy. His voice cracked completely. Please. Wyatt stood nearby helpless while flames consumed the barn behind them. The entire sky glowed orange now over Deadwater Field. Ghost's eyes stayed fixed on Caleb even through pain, trusting him, always trusting him. Caleb carefully lifted the dog into his arms. Ghost cried out weakly, I know. Caleb stumbled through freezing floodwater, carrying the wounded German Shepherd against his chest while snow hammered the fields around them. Every step burned. His knees shook. His lungs felt ripped apart by cold air. But he kept moving, because losing Ghost would destroy whatever remained inside him after the war. The farmhouse behind them groaned beneath spreading fire. The bunker entrance disappeared beneath smoke and drifting snow. Deadwater Field looked like a battlefield now, and somewhere beyond the storm, the men responsible for Leon Vance's death were still out there, watching, waiting, believing fear would finally drive Caleb Turner away. But as Caleb carried Ghost through the freezing darkness toward town, one terrible truth settled into his chest stronger than grief itself. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because now, this had become personal. Snow still fell across Black Hollow when Caleb Turner kicked open the door to the emergency veterinary clinic just before dawn. Wind blasted into the small building behind him, while Ghost hung limp in his arms wrapped inside Caleb's soaked military jacket. Help him! The receptionist jumped from her chair instantly. Within seconds, 2 veterinary technicians rushed forward with a stretcher. Ghost whimpered weakly as Caleb lowered him carefully down. Blood covered Caleb's hands, his clothes, his face. The older veterinarian appeared moments later, pulling on gloves while studying the wound. "Shotgun pellets," she muttered grimly. "Can you save him?" The woman looked directly at Caleb. "I'm going to try." They disappeared through swinging doors, carrying Ghost towards surgery. And suddenly Caleb stood alone. The adrenaline finally drained from his body all at once. He leaned heavily against the wall while snow melted from his jacket onto the clinic floor beneath him. Wyatt arrived carrying Leon Vance's tapes and documents inside a soaked duffel bag. The young man looked exhausted, terrified. "You okay?" Caleb nodded automatically. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from cold anymore, from fear, real fear. He had lost men before, friends, teammates, brothers, but watching Ghost collapse in the snow had ripped open wounds inside him the Navy never managed to heal. Wyatt sat beside him quietly. Neither spoke for a while. Outside, dawn slowly brightened the Iowa sky pale gray beyond the clinic windows. Finally, Wyatt broke the silence. "The barn's probably gone." Caleb stared ahead blankly. "The bunker survived." "How do you know?" "They wanted the evidence destroyed." He looked toward the duffel bag. "That means the evidence matters." Wyatt slowly unzipped the bag, revealing soaked maps, journals, cassette tapes, and Leon Vance's files, rescued from the underground bunker before the fire spread. One folder immediately caught Caleb's attention. Environmental containment reports. He opened it carefully. Dozens of pages, chemical analysis, groundwater contamination maps, internal memos stamped confidential, and one recurring name across nearly every document. Hawthorne Agricultural Holdings. Caleb's jaw tightened. Harold Pike, the lawyer. It all connected now. Wyatt unfolded another map across the waiting room chairs. Red circles marked farmland around Black Hollow, stretching miles on Deadwater Field. Dates beside them. Areas of contamination spread. "Jesus," Wyatt whispered. The circles covered nearly half the county. Caleb turned another page, then stopped. A handwritten note from Leon Vance had been clipped to one report. If containment barriers fail, groundwater exposure could affect nearby wells for generations. Caleb felt cold settle into his chest. Not fear this time. Anger. Deep, heavy. These people hadn't just buried chemicals. They buried entire families beneath silence. The clinic doors opened suddenly. Sheriff Keller stepped inside, carrying snow across the floor with him. His eyes moved immediately toward the duffel bag, then toward Caleb's blood-covered hands. "You boys all right?" "No." Keller nodded slowly. "Barn fire's under control now. Funny how nobody saw the trucks." The sheriff sighed tiredly. "You think I don't know what's happening?" Caleb studied him carefully. "You tell me." For several seconds, Keller said nothing. Then he sat heavily across from them. "I was a deputy when Leon disappeared." Wyatt looked up sharply. Keller rubbed one hand across his weathered face. "He came to us scared out of his mind. Said contamination was spreading through the county. Said people were getting sick." "What happened?" "Hawthorne happened." The sheriff stared toward the windows. Back then, they owned half the agricultural contracts in Iowa. Fertilizer, grain storage, waste disposal, money everywhere. "You covered it up?" "No." Keller's voice hardened suddenly. "Some people did. I was too young and too stupid to understand what I was looking at." Ghost's surgery light still glowed red above the hallway doors behind them. Caleb kept staring at it. Keller continued quietly. "Leon vanished after threatening to go public with evidence. Then the flooding got worse around Deadwater. Folks stopped going near it." He looked directly at Caleb now. "People around here wanted to believe the land was cursed because the truth was uglier." Wyatt opened another folder carefully. Inside sat photographs, dead cattle, near creeks, discolored water, children standing beside contaminated wells. One newspaper clipping carried a headline, "Local farmer dies after mysterious illness." Another, "Family forced to abandon property after water contamination." Caleb's stomach twisted. "How many people knew?" Keller answered honestly. "Enough to stay quiet." Silence settled over the waiting room. Outside, snowplows rumbled slowly down Main Street. Morning life continued normally in Black Hollow, while decades of buried poison sat beneath neighboring farmland. Then Wyatt discovered the final tape. Different label. Vance's final recording. Caleb inserted it carefully into the tape player. Static crackled softly. Then Leon's exhausted voice returned. "If you're hearing this, they already know I refuse to stop." The room went still. Leon coughed heavily. Hawthorne executives approved illegal disposal beneath Deadwater because flooding hid contamination movement. County officials signed off in exchange for development contracts. Keller closed his eyes briefly. The tape continued. "I copied everything. Names, payments, burial locations." Wyatt looked sharply at Caleb. "Burial locations?" Leon's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "They killed 2 workers after leakage spread into neighboring wells. Bodies buried north of the old bridge beneath the floodline." Caleb's chest tightened instantly. The bridge, where Ghost had been shot, where the dog kept warning them. Leon's voice cracked near the end of the recording. "If somebody finds this someday, don't let them erase us." Static filled the room afterward. Nobody spoke. Then finally, Caleb looked toward Sheriff Keller. "You ready to finish this?" The old sheriff stared at the evidence spread across the waiting room. Decades of silence, corruption, death. Then slowly, he nodded. "Yes." The surgery light above the hallway finally switched off. Every muscle inside Caleb locked instantly. The veterinarian stepped into the waiting room, removing her gloves slowly. Her tired eyes moved directly toward Caleb. For one terrible second, he thought she was about to tell him Ghost was gone. Then she smiled faintly. "He's alive." Caleb closed his eyes hard. The relief nearly dropped him to his knees. "The pellets missed major arteries," she continued. "He lost a lot of blood, but he's strong." Ghost. Strong. Of course he was. Caleb followed her into recovery moments later. The German Shepherd lay wrapped in blankets beneath soft lighting, bandages covering his shoulder and side. Tubes ran into his front leg, while machines beeped quietly nearby. Ghost lifted his head weakly when Caleb entered. Tail thumped once against the blanket. Caleb knelt beside him immediately. "There you are." The dog pressed his nose weakly into Caleb's hand. Alive. Scarred. Still fighting. Caleb rested his forehead gently against Ghost's. "And for the first time since Afghanistan," he cried openly. Not from weakness, not shame. Relief. Because somewhere along the road, after war and homelessness and broken years drifting through America, this dog had become the last thing keeping him connected to humanity, and Ghost had nearly died protecting him. Wyatt stood quietly in the doorway watching. Sheriff Keller beside him. Neither interrupted. Outside, morning sunlight finally broke through the snow clouds over Black Hollow, and deep beneath Deadwater Field, the truth buried under Iowa had finally begun rising to the surface. Winter broke slowly across Black Hollow. The snow melted first along the drainage ditches Caleb Turner had carved through Deadwater Field months earlier. Then the standing water began shrinking across the ruined farmland as cold March rain softened the frozen ground beneath it. For the first time in decades, parts of the land started breathing again. Black soil emerged beneath retreating floodwater, rich, dark, alive. Caleb stood beside the property fence, one gray morning watching fog rise from the thawing fields while Ghost leaned carefully against his leg. The German Shepherd still carried scars from the shotgun blast. A patch of fur along his shoulder never fully grew back, and he walked with a slight stiffness on colder mornings now. But he was alive. That alone felt like a miracle. Ghost lifted his nose toward the breeze, no growling anymore, no fear. The dog still watched the woods carefully, but the panic that once lived in his eyes had faded. The land itself felt different now, too. Lighter somehow, as if Deadwater Field had been holding its breath for 40 years, waiting for somebody to finally uncover the truth buried beneath it. Behind Caleb, trucks rolled slowly onto the property. Not black SUVs this time. Volunteers, farmers, veterans, families from Black Hollow. Word had spread after Sheriff Keller and state investigators exposed Hawthorne Agricultural Holdings publicly. The tapes, the bunker, Leon Vance's remains, the buried contamination reports, everything. The story exploded across Iowa within days. News vans arrived first, then environmental crews, then former employees who finally admitted what they had seen decades earlier. The company collapsed under investigations almost overnight. Executives disappeared behind lawyers. County officials resigned quietly. And suddenly, the land nobody wanted became the center of the entire state. But Caleb barely cared about reporters. What mattered was what came after. Healing. That was the part nobody ever talked enough about. The state cleanup crews removed contaminated barrels from beneath the bunker throughout February. Engineers installed filtration systems near the creek, while environmental specialists tested groundwater across neighboring farms. And slowly, people returned to Deadwater Field, not out of fear anymore. Hope. Wyatt Mercer climbed out of a pickup carrying lumber across one shoulder. He looked different now, too. Stronger, cleaner, more certain of himself. The lost drifter, sleeping in parking lots, had disappeared somewhere during the winter storms. In his place stood a young man with purpose. "You still want the fence line along the south field?" he called. Caleb nodded. "Keep it wide enough for equipment access." Ghost trotted slowly beside Wyatt while volunteers unloaded supplies from trucks nearby. Raised garden beds, fence posts, seed bags, tools. The property buzzed with life now. Almost every weekend brought more people. Some came because they felt guilty for mocking Caleb at the auction. Others came because Leon Vance's story reminded them of relatives they lost to silence and corruption. But many came for simpler reasons. The land felt worth saving, and somehow, so did Caleb. The old farmhouse still leaned badly beneath weathered boards, but volunteers had repaired the roof enough to stop rain from flooding the rooms. Fresh plywood covered broken windows now. Smoke curled from the repaired chimney each evening. It finally looked lived in, human again. Ghost stopped near the rebuilt porch, where a little girl carefully placed flower pots along the railing. Sophie Turner, 9 years old, Caleb's granddaughter. She looked up immediately when Ghost approached. "There's my brave boy." The German shepherd leaned gently into her hands while she scratched behind his ears. Months earlier, Caleb never expected to see his family again, especially Rachel, his daughter. Their relationship had collapsed slowly after Afghanistan, not through hatred, through distance. PTSD had turned Caleb into a ghost long before he met Ghost. He stopped answering calls, stopped attending birthdays, stopped feeling safe around people who loved him, because deep down he believed eventually he would fail them too. Rachel finally stopped trying after too many years of silence. Then she saw Deadwater Field on the news. The homeless veteran exposing corruption, the wounded military dog, the burned barn, the veterans helping rebuild the property afterward. And suddenly the father she thought was lost forever no longer looked unreachable. Caleb heard her car before he saw it. The silver SUV rolled slowly onto the property beneath clear spring sunlight, while volunteers worked nearby planting the first crops of the season. Ghost noticed immediately. The dog stood alert but calm beside the porch. Caleb froze slightly. Rachel stepped out slowly, mid-30s now. Brown hair tied back loosely against the wind. Tired eyes exactly like her mother's. For a moment neither moved. The years between them felt enormous. Then Sophie broke the silence first. "Mom! Ghost's awake!" Rachel smiled faintly at her daughter before looking back at Caleb. "You look older." Caleb almost laughed. "Feel older, too." The tension softened slightly, not gone, but cracked open. Rachel looked across Deadwater Field slowly, the raised garden beds, the repaired barn frame, veterans rebuilding fencing near the west side, children carrying seedlings through fresh mud, and Ghost standing calmly beside Caleb beneath warm spring sunlight. "I thought the news exaggerated everything," she admitted quietly. "They usually do, but not this. No." Ghost walked slowly toward her. Rachel crouched automatically as the German shepherd approached. He saved your life more than once. Ghost rested his scarred head gently against her hand, and something inside Rachel visibly shifted because she finally saw it. Not the broken homeless veteran she feared becoming responsible for, not the angry disconnected father who vanished after war, but a man trying desperately to build something meaningful out of ruins. Maybe because I didn't mean to. The afternoon passed slowly beneath bright Iowa skies. Rachel stayed longer than planned, then longer still. She helped plant tomato seedlings beside the south drainage line, while Sophie followed Ghost everywhere, carrying a toy shovel, twice too large for her. Wyatt built raised beds nearby with two older veterans from Des Moines, one missing part of his left leg, another carrying oxygen tubes beneath his jacket, all of them laughing, working, alive. Caleb watched from the porch quietly, and for the first time in many years, the silence inside his chest no longer felt empty. That evening, Rachel found him sitting near the flooded woods watching sunset reflect across Deadwater Field. Ghost rested beside him beneath the fading light. "You still have nightmares?" she asked softly. Caleb considered lying. "Didn't?" "Yeah." Rachel nodded slowly. "I used to think you stopped loving us." The words hit harder than gunfire ever could. Caleb stared across the fields. "I stopped knowing how." The truth settled quietly between them. Wind moved through the tall grass softly. Ghost lifted his head briefly toward the woods before relaxing again. Rachel sat beside Caleb carefully. "You should've called, I know. You missed a lot." Pain crossed Caleb's face. "I know that too." For several moments, neither spoke. Then Sophie's laughter carried across the property from near the garden beds. Bright, happy, alive. Rachel looked toward the sound. "She likes it here." Caleb smiled faintly. "Ghost likes her. That dog likes everybody, except murderers." Caleb actually laughed then. A real laugh, small, rusted from disuse, but real. Rachel heard it, and suddenly tears filled her eyes before she could stop them, because she realized something heartbreaking in that moment. She had not heard her father laugh like that since before the war. Ghost rested his head against Caleb's leg while sunset burned gold across the recovering Iowa farmland. And slowly, after years of darkness, Deadwater Field began coming back to life. Summer settled gently across the Iowa fields. Tall grass moved like waves beneath warm wind while rows of tomatoes, corn, and beans stretched across land once buried beneath poison and fear. The old drainage trenches Caleb Turner carved by hand months earlier now carried clean water steadily away from the recovering soil. Children ran through the garden paths where floodwater once stood black and still. Veterans rebuilt fencing near the west field while volunteers painted fresh boards onto the repaired barn. Wind chimes hung from the farmhouse porch now. Flower pots lined the steps beside Ghost's favorite sleeping spot in the afternoon sun. The place no longer looked cursed. It looked alive. And somehow, so did Caleb. The memorial gathering started just before sunset. Cars lined the county road leading toward Deadwater Field, while families crossed the grass carrying folding chairs and casseroles and mason jars filled with wildflowers. People came from all over: Iowa farmers, veterans, journalists, former workers from Hawthorne Agricultural Holdings who finally found courage to speak publicly after decades of silence, and families connected to the poisoned land, families who lost fathers, mothers, brothers, children, people whose illnesses were ignored because powerful men buried truth beneath money and floodwater. At the center of the restored property, beside the rebuilt pond near the old bridge, volunteers had placed a polished stone memorial surrounded by prairie flowers. Sheriff Keller stood quietly beside it, removing his hat as guests gathered nearby. The engraved plaque read, "In memory of Leon Vance and all those silenced beneath Deadwater Field. Truth does not stay buried forever." Ghost sat beside Caleb near the memorial, while evening sunlight turned the Iowa sky gold behind them. The German Shepherd had aged noticeably since winter, more gray around his muzzle now, movement slower, but his eyes remained sharp, steady, peaceful. Children approached him constantly throughout the day, and Ghost accepted every gentle hand patiently. The dog, who once trembled at the sound of buried metal, now rested calmly beneath open skies, surrounded by people. Caleb looked down at him quietly. "You did good, buddy." Ghost leaned against his leg. Rachel arrived carrying iced tea, while Sophie raced ahead toward the garden with 2 other children. The distance between father and daughter had softened over the months like frozen ground, thawing after winter. Not perfect. Some wounds never disappear completely, but healing had begun. And sometimes healing was enough. "You ready?" Rachel asked, softly. Caleb glanced toward the growing crowd. "Not really, you'll be fine." Ghost stood carefully as Caleb rose. Together they walked toward the memorial, while the evening wind carried the smell of fresh soil and summer grass across Deadwater Field. The crowd fell quiet when Caleb stopped beside the plaque. For a moment he simply looked at them. All these people standing together on land everyone once feared. Then he cleared his throat. "I'm not much for speeches." A few soft laughs moved through the crowd. Caleb rested one hand gently against Ghost's neck. "When I bought this property for $185, people thought I'd lost my mind." Even Sheriff Keller smiled slightly at that. Caleb continued, "Truth is, maybe I had." The crowd listened closely. "After the Navy, I spent years drifting. Didn't trust people much anymore. Didn't trust myself either." He looked across the field slowly. "War leaves things inside you that don't always heal right." Rachel lowered her eyes quietly. Caleb's voice remained calm. "But this land gave me something back I thought I'd lost forever." He gestured toward the gardens. The people buried beneath the story deserved better than silence. Then he looked toward Leon Vance's memorial stone. And Leon deserved somebody willing to finish what he started. Wind moved softly through the prairie grass around the pond. Ghost sat beside Caleb, watching the crowd calmly. Caleb smiled faintly. "But honestly, none of this happens without him." Several people looked toward Ghost immediately. The German shepherd blinked slowly beneath the fading sunlight. He knew something was wrong from the first day we walked into that courthouse. Caleb paused. Then slowly the realization returned fully for the first time. Clear, complete, the property map. Rachel looked at him curiously. Caleb nodded slowly. "Ghost reacted before we even saw the land itself." Sheriff Keller frowned thoughtfully. "The chemicals." Caleb looked down at Ghost. "Military disposal compounds. Residual traces probably remained in the old survey documents from the contaminated site reports." He shook his head in disbelief. Ghost was trained to detect military chemical residue overseas. Rachel stared at the dog. "You mean he smelled it?" "He knew from the beginning." Silence settled gently across the gathering. Ghost rested his head against Caleb's leg exactly like he had that first night at Deadwater Field. Only now there was no fear in him, no warning, just peace. Caleb looked out across the restored farmland one final time as sunset deepened around them. The rebuilt barn stood strong against the evening sky. Garden rows stretched across rich black soil. Children laughed near the pond where poisoned water once carried death through the flooded woods. And near the farmhouse porch hung a small wooden sign, Wyatt built weeks earlier, Turner Veterans Recovery Farm, and K9 Rehabilitation Center. The land nobody wanted had become sanctuary. For veterans, for wounded dogs, for families trying to heal, for people the world nearly forgot. Later that night, after the crowd slowly disappeared and the stars emerged over Iowa one by one, Caleb sat alone beside the pond near the old bridge. Ghost rested beside him beneath the warm darkness. Crickets filled the fields with soft, steady music. No engines, no gunfire, no buried metal echoing beneath the earth. Just peace, real peace. Caleb stared across the calm water reflecting moonlight. "You know," he said quietly, scratching behind Ghost's ears, "I think you saved me long before I saved you." Ghost lifted his head slightly at the sound of Caleb's voice. The German shepherd's scarred body relaxed slowly against the grass afterward. For the first time since arriving at Deadwater Field, the dog finally slept without fear. Caleb leaned back beside him, watching stars spread endlessly across the summer sky above Iowa, and somewhere beneath the restored land where poison and secrets once lived, clean water moved quietly through the earth again, steady, patient, free. Some places are abandoned because people fear what's buried there. Some men are abandoned because the world mistakes pain for weakness. But sometimes, all it takes is one loyal dog to lead both back into the light. If you believe some land and some people are worth fighting for, comment yes below and tell us where you're watching from tonight. And if Ghost and Caleb's story meant something to you, subscribe and stay with us for more stories about justice, loyalty, and second chances out here in the heart of America.